Hi everyone, I'm Jurassic Jack, the Rambling Raconteur, and I give you the Astounding Science Fiction tag. I love science fiction, and when I saw Michael K. Vaughan burst out with his original tag, which I saw this afternoon, I knew that I needed to blast off and make the stars my destination, so here we go. Prompt 1. What was the first science fiction book you read? Well, within about the same year, and I'm not sure, I can't really recall which one I read first, but I was hooked with science fiction with both of them. One was The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, and the other was Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. And it was the year Jurassic Park came out. I was fascinated by dinosaurs as a kid. I loved dinosaurs. And so when Jurassic Park came out, which I want to say was in second grade, I read the junior novelization, but my parents had the adult novel. And I thought, okay, I want the real thing. So I read Jurassic Park, and I definitely preferred the movie more. But it was interesting. It was the second adult novel I'd read after Watership Down, which is a masterpiece. And, I stayed fascinated by some of the ideas that were in Jurassic Park. It sent me off on some interesting routes. Definitely, though, The Time Machine hooked me a little bit more closely to reading more science fiction. And never looked back. I enjoyed The Time Machine. I reread it last year. I've read it several times, and I always really enjoy it. It's perhaps the characterization or the narrative maybe isn't perfect and is weak in some areas, but the questions it asks, particularly if you're a young reader, the questions that are asked in The Time Machine, the ways in which it shatters the time continuum, it makes us question things and wonder. And that sense of wonder is, I think, the hallmark of science fiction. So just was hooked. Prompt 2, what was the last science fiction book you read and what did you think of it? Well, it was We by Yevgeny Zamyatin, a dystopic novel from the early 20th century, one that is quite strong, one I would certainly highly recommend. I'll link my video discussing the book in much more detail in the description box. There were aspects of We that I think are really interesting in terms of narrative, in terms of the way that the concept of number is involved, the ways in which Zamyatin is using science fiction and speculation to be deeply ironic and to ask questions of any totalitarian regime. So this is definitely a keeper. But if I were to do this tag next week, it would be Kallocain by Karin Boye, another dystopic novel, and one that I'm really fascinated to read. I'm really looking forward to it, and I think I'm going to have time this weekend. All right. Prompt 3. If you love science fiction. What made you love science fiction? And it was that sense of wonder. It was honestly the fascination that and the avenues, the different pathways of science that it exposed me to. And I think that was really what fascinated me. I read the comic books, I read about Spider-Man or the X-Men or the Hulk, and I thought the Fantastic Four, I thought those were all interesting stories, but I was always really interested in the science behind the origin story. I wanted to know, what happens about this radioactive spider? What happens if you're bombarded with gamma radiation? I want to learn more about these things. The Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, all of those ideas that had this collision of science and questions and speculation, the idea that science is a process that continues, that we're never finished with it. We're always leading to a new question. We're always continuing to push that frontier. And so it wasn't just reading science fiction that it sent me off on, it was also reading science. And so I have just a bunch of works like, as I had put up this past weekend, Biophilia by E.O. Wilson. Wilson has so many interesting ideas around the human mind and ideas around consilience that I've found fascinating, even through my 20s and 30s. More recently, someone like Lauren Isley, I have the Library of America section from him. That type of, sort of the questions around biology that science can ask, whether it was from Jurassic Park, and I think that was probably where I first heard about the concept of DNA and wondering, what on earth is that? And then later on, as we learn more and more about biology and really fascinating ideas around biology, then the shift is over to physics. And so I have works like The Physics of Star Trek by Lawrence Krauss, The Physics of Superheroes by James Kakalios. He also has a great one on quantum mechanics. And of course, Black Holes and Time Warps by Kip Thorne, who might come up for a mention in one of the later questions. So reading around science was the other part. I just appreciated learning all these fascinating ideas. And in the 20th century, a huge number of advances had been made, And so they had kind of moved beyond the level of revolutionary cutting edge advances that we're still trying to understand to advances that people could write about in a register that, you know, a lay reader could access and could understand. So there we go. Prompt 4, what is your favorite science fiction movie? And there are many. There are some, you know, like Jurassic Park, but Sunshine, which I think a lot of people feel is imperfect. I thought it was amazing. My brother and I were the only two people in the theater when we went and saw it. Legitimately, there were the two of us in the theater. And I was amazed by it. I walked away thinking, like, that's fantastic. And when it aired at my college theater several months later, because it was like the $3 theater and the movies were always something that had been out later on. I was an RA at the time. I got a whole group of people from my wing, a bunch of freshmen and sophomores in college, to come see it with me, which was fun. So Sunshine's great. The Matrix. Interstellar, wanted to mention Kip Thorne again. I loved that film. Synchronicity, that again is one that deals with like time travel and some really fascinating ideas. And again, it's not perfect, but it's interesting. It's fascinating. Escape from New York, that one's from my dad. He loved that film. And early on, I think my younger brother enjoyed the film more than I did, but I love that film now. I would even say things like Black Panther, the Godzilla films, and the like actual Godzilla films, the Gojira films with Mothra and all sorts of other weird and interesting creatures that, again, often deal with atomic power. So I really enjoy science fiction films as well. Those are some that I don't hear people talking about. Jurassic Park, obviously, but I don't hear people talking about all of those as much. Prompt 5, what is your favorite science fiction TV show? It's definitely Battlestar Galactica. It's not even close. So far out in front. I will add, though, that my wife and I really, really enjoyed the Foundation season that aired this past fall. And I loved it, and she loved it too, so say we all. Prompt 6, what science fiction book do you feel should be read more often? There are a lot. I'm going to mention just a few. I think Downbelow Station by C.J. Cherryh is definitely one of my favorites. And, you know, I see it on lists. Like, I think it's been on some Locus list in the past 20 years or so. But this is a really, really interesting book. It's got a real sense of adventure. There are all sorts of different, I don't want to say timelines, but like narratives going on. And so that's a really great one. I would add Revelation Space by Alistair Reynolds. This is a cool book. The combinations of like archaeology and paleontology that it involves in outer space on alien planets is really cool. Some of the creations that Reynolds came up with are very imaginative and really interesting. And so I would highly, highly recommend this one. This is an interesting one. I don't know how many people actually read Dahlgren, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily view Samuel Delany, like Dahlgren specifically, as science fiction. I do, and I'd be interested to know how many people have read this. You know, I think it elicits pretty visceral reactions among most readers, and not underrated, but just can't be read frequently enough. A Canticle for Lebowitz. This is a great book. Let's see. Two others. And I think 5 years ago, I would have said Kindred by Octavia Butler, but I think more and more people are reading her. I mean, she's in the Library of America now, which is super cool and well-deserved, but I would have said Kindred, but I think we've kind of had this renaissance in people reading Octavia Butler. And Ursula K. Le Guin is never someone who's underread, but Always Coming Home is outstanding. It's absurd how good that book is. And again, I almost never hear that mentioned, so I would want to put her out there. Let's see. Prompt 7, what is your favorite science fiction story? Well, I happen to have those Science Fiction Hall of Fame books. These have a lot of great ones. I often point to Vintage Season by C.L. Moore, Henry Kuttner and C.L. Moore, but really C.L. Moore, as one of my favorites. But I would add, of course, Nightfall by Isaac Asimov, if you're reading the future history that Sean D. Standfast organized and that numerous people are reading. Nightfall will be the final story in it. But it doesn't really spoil anything to read Nightfall just now, because it's my favorite science fiction story. Who Goes There by John W. Campbell is also great science fiction. And let's see, prompt 8. The Word for the World is Force by Guin. That would also, I review that more as like a long story than a novel. So prompt 8, what is your favorite science fiction book? This was very, very, very tough. Gateway by Frederick Pohl would be on my short list because this is a cool book. Very, very cool. Very just, it has a real sense of pace, but there's also some real depth and interiority for our main narrator in this book. It's a really excellent science fiction book. Last year I read The Black God's Drums by P. Djeli Clark, and it was kind of like a steampunk type book, and I really enjoy steampunk. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. But if I was picking one, just right now, you just pick one, I think it's The Anubis Gates by Tim Powers, because it combines some time travel type stuff with Victorian poetry and sort of that like London labor, London poor type setting, Dickensian setting. And it's fantastic. This book, if you've never read The Anubis Gates, give it a shot. I think most people who give it a shot are really interested in it. So I want to recommend this one. But I want to add a question. I want to add a prompt because, as I said, science fiction is all about wonder. A lot of times we think with science fiction, we think of the future and future settings. So I want to add a prompt 9. And that's going to be, if science fiction has this speculation in future and wonder, what is a science fiction book or story that you're excited to read, that you're excited to add, to your mind? So I have a couple. One, just for Michael, because he's a great guy, would be City by Clifford Simic. This is my copy. I don't know if he has this one. I know he has several. This is a pretty cool, weird looking cover too. But I'm excited to give this a shot in 2022. I do have the 1960s volumes that Library of America did with science fiction. And so the earlier one has Way Station by Clifford Simic, High Crusade by Paul Anderson, This Immortal by Roger Zelazny. Great stuff. And then this volume has Pastmaster by R.A. Lafferty. I've never read that. I've never heard of R.A. Lafferty. Has Picnic in Paradise, though, by Joanna Russ, who's superb. Nova by Samuel Delany. Great book. And then Inferio by Jack Vance. I'm excited to be reading in those volumes as well. And then I'm going to add, I picked up this Best from Orbit, edited, I believe, by Damon Knight. Yeah, so I think there's some cool, there are different writers I'd heard of. Joanna Russ, Robert Silverberg, Harlan Ellison. And I'm going to be continuing to read from the Dangerous Visions anthology as well. So I'm sure I'm going to be discovering some wonderful science fiction stories as I read through both of these volumes. And then 2 other novels. I know Noah had kind of showed this one, Future Home of the Living God by Louise Erdrich. Super excited to get to this, I believe, next month. And then I'm just sort of curious, and I don't know when I will have time to read it, but if anybody else has read Anathem by Neil Stephenson, I've enjoyed a couple of Stevenson's books, and I think I'm going to try and get to this year. So if anybody else wanted to join in at some point, just let me know, and maybe we could figure that out. But I love science fiction. I hope you love science fiction. Let's, blast off. Share the wonder. So have a great week, everybody. Thanks.